Edward woke early that morning, feeling a bit anxious, his thoughts darting between the day ahead and the return of his wife, Emily. She had been away on business for several weeks, and the house had felt empty without her. He made sure everything was just right, coffee brewing, the living room tidied, and her favorite blanket draped over the armchair. When the door opened, there she was, standing in the soft morning light filtering through the hallway windows. Her smile was tired but warm, and he immediately wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "Welcome home, Emily," he murmured. She hugged him tightly, resting her head on his shoulder. "It feels good to be back," she said softly. After a few moments, she stepped back and reached into her bag, pulling out a small white stick. "I've got some news for you," she said, her face breaking into a gentle smile. "I'm pregnant, Edward." Edward stared, trying to process both her words and the object in her hand. A wave of surprise and excitement bubbled up inside him. "Emily, are you serious?" "Wow." He reached for her hand, holding it tightly as he tried to absorb what she had just said. Emily nodded, laughing as she wiped a tear from her eye. "Yes, we're going to be parents, Tom. Isn't that worth celebrating?" She gave him a quick kiss and squeezed his hand. Though he felt happiness fill him, a small sliver of doubt crept in. They hadn't been as close lately, not since before her trip, and he hesitated for a moment before speaking up. In a quiet voice, he voiced his concern, but Emily simply laughed it off, saying something about how timing could be strange and that she'd schedule a doctor's appointment to confirm everything. Edward nodded, feeling reassured but still a bit unsettled. As he grabbed his coat and briefcase for work, her news stayed with him, lingering in his thoughts. Despite her explanations, that subtle doubt remained. By the time he arrived at the office, he could hardly focus on the contracts on his desk or the emails piling up in his inbox. Instead, his mind kept drifting back to the story of how he had met Emily. It had been 5 years since Emily had changed Edward's life. He remembered it clearly, at a celebration thrown by the company for his promotion to senior manager. The excitement of that night was still vivid in his mind. The crowded room, the chatter of colleagues, and the pride he had felt in the moment. That was when he first saw Emily, across the room, laughing and talking with his colleague, Aaron Reed. Aaron, as ambitious as Edward, was known for his arrogance and tendency to take credit for work he hadn't done. Their relationship was competitive, and while they respected each other's talents, there was always an underlying rivalry. That night, Aaron's attitude was as bold as ever, laughing too loudly, holding onto Emily's arm like she was some kind of prize. Edward noticed how Aaron leaned in, almost as if claiming her. Aaron had a way of turning everything into a contest, but Edward wasn't the type to back down. Determined, Edward struck up a conversation with Emily, and before long, they were laughing and talking easily about small things, while Aaron stood nearby, clearly impatient and irritated. Emily was smart, easy to talk to, and charming without trying too hard, qualities that immediately drew Edward in. As the night went on, Aaron grew more arrogant, tossing out hints about his own ambitions and bragging about his future plans, which barely seemed believable. Edward noticed Emily's expression shift, her interest waning as Aaron's boasting grew tiresome. When Aaron excused himself to speak with a group of executives, Edward saw an opportunity. He offered to get Emily a drink, and she smiled, clearly relieved. From that point on, things just clicked. They exchanged numbers, and what began as a coffee date soon turned into dinners, long late-night conversations, weekends spent exploring the city, and quiet evenings at Edward's apartment. For the first time in his life, Edward felt deeply connected to someone. Emily was thoughtful, kind, and made him feel truly seen, as though he had finally found a place where he belonged. A year into their relationship, Edward knew he couldn't wait any longer. One evening, as they walked along the beach, the moonlight casting a soft glow on the water, he turned to her. The words felt simple, yet right. He took her hand, looked into her eyes, and asked her to marry him. She said yes, her smile lighting up her entire face, and in that moment, he knew they were meant to be. Edward bought a small house near the ocean for them, cozy and comfortable. They spent countless hours making it their own, arranging furniture, picking out paint colors, and transforming it into a home they both loved. Some days, they'd sit on the back porch, watching the waves roll in, sharing everything from their hopes to their worries. They built their life with love and laughter, and though there were the occasional small arguments over chores, late work nights, or even how to arrange the kitchen, they always found their way back to each other. Edward often thought about those moments, the happy ones, and even the challenging ones. He could see Emily smile, hear her laughter, and feel her hand in his. Now, With the news of the baby, he wondered if they were about to start an entirely new chapter. But that one lingering question kept resurfacing. Was his wife being completely honest with him? There were some pieces of her pregnancy that just didn't add up. Despite his doubts, Edward tried to push them aside. He loved Emily and wanted to believe her. By the time he arrived home that evening, he had managed to quiet most of those concerns, deciding that trust was more important. When he opened the door, he was welcomed by the soft glow of candlelight and the comforting scent of Emily's cooking. She had prepared a romantic dinner, wine for him, sparkling water for her, and all of their favorite dishes. They laughed, shared stories about their days, and everything felt almost normal. Emily seemed happier than ever, glowing with excitement, and her voice was full of love as she spoke tenderly. Edward felt himself relax. After dinner, Emily took his hand and gave him a playful smile, suggesting they head upstairs. When he hesitated, briefly mentioning the pregnancy, she reassured him with a warm laugh. "Oh, Edward," Emily said with a smile, "I already checked with the doctor. He said it's safe for us." That night, they went to bed, and Edward did his best to push his doubts aside. However, 2 days later, Emily came back from another doctor's appointment with news that hit him hard. "Edward, the doctor said I'm about 4 weeks along," she told him, smiling as she shared the update. Edward quickly did the math in his head, and his stomach twisted. He was sure they hadn't been intimating 4 weeks ago. When he cautiously brought it up, Emily brushed it off, insisting that it had happened and that he had simply forgotten. Her explanation was smooth, almost rehearsed. Edward nodded along, pretending to agree, but inside, his mind raced with suspicion. As the days went on, his doubts grew stronger, weighing on him constantly. Then something else happened that made his heart sink. Edward began to feel an uncomfortable irritation in his groin, something that only worsened. Concerned, he decided to see a doctor without telling Emily. After taking a few tests, hoping it was nothing serious, the results came back as a shock. He had contracted an STD. The news hit him like a punch, and everything he had been trying to ignore came into sharp, painful focus. In that moment, his doubts became something far more serious. The discovery gnawed at him, and he knew he couldn't ignore his suspicions any longer. He needed answers. With Emily out for the morning, Edward saw an opportunity to check her things. He opened her laptop, carefully sifting through her emails and any documents related to her recent business trip. Though Emily now worked for a different company, Edward hadn't expected what he was about to find. After scrolling through countless emails and scanning documents, he came across an itinerary for her business trip. His stomach dropped as he saw a name he hadn't seen in a long time. Aaron Reed. He hadn't even known Aaron was still in the same industry. Aaron had left Edward's company over a year ago, and Edward hadn't thought about him since. But here, on the itinerary, was Aaron's name alongside Emily's, both listed as part of the team for a business exhibition. Aaron wasn't just attending the same event. He was now a colleague. The realization hit Edward all at once. The rivalry, the arrogance, the way Aaron had hovered around Emily at that party years ago. It all came rushing back. He couldn't shake the feeling that Aaron might see this as an opportunity to get back at him. After all, it had been clear at the time that Emily's attention had shifted toward Edward, and Aaron had never taken that loss well. Could Aaron be using his new connection with Emily to settle an old score? Or worse, had they rekindled something while he was away? As these thoughts swirled in his mind, the pieces began to fall into place in a way Edward couldn't ignore. While he couldn't prove anything yet, it was beginning to feel like he was looking at a clear picture of betrayal. The idea that Emily might have fallen for Aaron and was now conspiring behind his back haunted Edward. He couldn't stop imagining them together, whispering to each other, mocking him, plotting to take everything he'd worked for. What hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal itself, but the thought of Emily making him look like a fool. If she had a child with Aaron and passed it off as his, she could secure alimony and possibly claim a large portion of his assets. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't just sit by and let it happen. He needed to protect himself before it was too late. Edward took action quickly. Within days, he met with a lawyer and a financial advisor. He explained everything: Emily's suspicious behavior, her possible connection with Aaron, and the pregnancy. The lawyer, a sharp-minded woman named Matilda, didn't waste any time. She immediately outlined a strategy to protect his finances and property. Together, they developed a plan. First, Matilda suggested Edward create a new trust fund. This trust would hold his most valuable assets, the house, his retirement fund, and his stock portfolio. Legally, the trust would own these assets for the benefit of future heirs or specific family members, meaning Emily couldn't claim them in a divorce settlement. Since Edward would only be the trustee and not the owner of the assets, they would be out of Emily's reach. Next, his financial advisor recommended transferring his savings to offshore accounts in countries with strict privacy laws. By moving his money to international accounts, they could protect it from any potential legal claims. The advisor also suggested that Edward convert a portion of his savings into physical assets, such as gold and collectibles, which could be stored in private vaults. These assets wouldn't be linked to his name on paper, making them harder to trace. They also agreed that Edward should take out a loan against the house. The loan funds would be placed in a secured account under his lawyer's firm, with the debt effectively lowering the house's value. If Emily tried to claim the house in a divorce settlement, the loan balance would reduce its perceived worth, making it less attractive. Finally, Matilda advised Edward to keep detailed records of everything: his interactions with Emily, her suspicious behavior, and any evidence he could gather about Aaron. If this situation ever went to court, Edward would need proof of Emily's deception. Over the next week, Edward quietly put these plans into motion. He moved his savings, transferred the house into the trust, and began securing his assets, piece by piece. He was careful not to raise suspicion, keeping his conversations with Emily light and acting as though nothing had changed. Edward knew he couldn't stop there. He needed solid proof. So, he hired a private detective to track Emily's movements and confirm his suspicions about Aaron. The detective, a quiet and meticulous man named David, got to work immediately. Emily and Aaron were careful, never acting openly romantic or spending too much time together in public. However, David managed to capture a few moments: a lingering glance, a private lunch, and an evening spent in a secluded cafe. In the photos and videos, Emily and Aaron leaned in close, speaking softly, their expressions betraying an unmistakable warmth. It wasn't much, but it could be useful in court. Their meetings didn't look like colleagues discussing work. They appeared to be two people sharing something much deeper. Edward didn't give David much more time to gather further evidence. He felt ready. He couldn't wait any longer. With everything in place, Edward met with Matilda, and together they finalized the divorce papers. Matilda ensured the paperwork covered everything, protecting his assets as planned and leaving Emily with far less than she might have expected. Once the papers were ready, Edward quietly packed his essentials, leaving behind the life he had built with Emily. Without a word, Edward left town, moving to a distant part of the country where Emily couldn't easily find him. He checked into a quiet hotel, allowing the days to pass in solitude, knowing that sooner or later, Emily would return to an empty house. When Emily came back from her 3-day trip, she found the house silent and deserted. At first, she thought Edward was just working late or out with friends. But then she noticed the envelope on the kitchen counter. Her hands trembled as she opened it, finding only the divorce papers, stamped and signed. Nothing else. She stood frozen, staring at the papers in disbelief, unable to comprehend how everything had fallen apart so suddenly. Emily did everything she could to reach Edward. She called his old number, but it had been disconnected. She searched for him on social media, only to find his accounts had vanished. She even reached out to their mutual friends, but no one knew where he was. It was as if Edward had disappeared without a trace, leaving her with nothing but the harsh reality of the divorce. Meanwhile, Edward sat alone in his hotel room, the weight of everything he'd experienced settling heavily on him. The betrayal, the broken trust, and the doubts he had pushed away for so long were now undeniable. The stress, the sleepless nights, and the loneliness gnawed at him. He knew he needed to get away, to find somewhere quiet where he could clear his mind. After some searching, he found a small cabin in the woods. It was isolated, surrounded by trees and open sky, a perfect place for solitude and reflection. There, in the peace of the cabin, Edward hoped he could find some clarity. He quit his job, unable to bear the thought of the office or the memories of Emily and Aaron's betrayal. The cabin offered him a space to be alone with his thoughts, away from everything that had once been his life. When the divorce trial began, Edward didn't attend in person. He stayed in touch with his lawyer, Matilda, via video if the judge required it, but mostly, Matilda handled the proceedings. Emily, on the other hand, arrived at court unprepared, expecting things to go in her favor. But Edward had planned carefully. His assets were well protected in the trust fund, offshore accounts, and the reduced house value. None of it was accessible to Emily. All she had were the divorce papers and her growing frustration. Emily was furious, but her options were limited. The only leverage she had left was her pregnancy, so she tried to use it to gain sympathy, hoping it would sway the outcome in her favor. However, Edward had come fully prepared. Matilda presented his medical records, showing he had contracted an STD, something Emily couldn't deny. Alongside this, the photos and videos of Emily with Aaron were submitted as evidence of infidelity. In a matter of minutes, Emily's advantage evaporated, and she found herself backed into a corner. She had entered the courtroom expecting to control the situation, but instead, she left with nothing. The life she had planned, the hopes she had pinned on her strategy, were slipping through her fingers. In that moment, Emily realized that the man she had tried to deceive had left her with nothing but a deep sense of loss. After everything fell apart, Emily went to see Aaron, hoping for some comfort. But when she arrived, the anger in his eyes made her freeze. "You ruined everything," he hissed, glaring at her. "I thought you'd have enough sense to keep quiet about the pregnancy until we had everything figured out. But no, you rushed into it, and now Edward has shut us out completely." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She had believed she and Aaron were in love, that they were partners in this. But now, seeing the frustration in his face, she felt an unsettling doubt creep in. Aaron no longer looked at her with affection or concern. His expression was twisted with frustration, as if he had lost a game. He thought he was winning. "I thought," Emily stammered, searching for words. "I thought we were in this together. I thought we were doing this because we cared about each other." Aaron scoffed, rolling his eyes. "You were supposed to help me take Edward down," he snapped. "But you told him about the baby too soon. We could have checked everything first, lined up the paperwork, secured the assets. But no, now he's moved everything and it's all gone." Emily was filled with a mix of shame and fear. She had been so certain that Aaron cared for her, but now it was clear that he had only used her as a pawn in his plan to get revenge on Edward. Before she could say anything, Aaron cut her off. "You know what?" he said, his voice cold. "I don't want anything to do with you anymore. You ruined this whole thing." Emily felt tears well up in her eyes, but she tried to hold it together. "But the baby," she said quietly, hoping for a sign of sympathy, any hint of care. Aaron just laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "What baby?" He waved her off dismissively, an annoyed look on his face. "Who knows who you've been with? Don't pin that on me." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing there, stunned. She realized then that she had lost everything. Edward, the life they had built, and now even the man she thought she could rely on. After the birth of her son, Emily, feeling the full weight of her financial and emotional struggles, made the difficult decision to take legal action against Aaron. She knew the path ahead would be complicated and filled with tension, but she had no other choice. Despite Aaron's previous claims of being absent from the situation and not wanting to be involved, the reality was different now. Emily had already endured so much, and she needed the support for her child, support that Aaron was legally obligated to provide. Emily's lawyer filed a lawsuit against Aaron for child support, citing the undeniable facts: the DNA test, which confirmed Aaron as the father, and his legal responsibility to provide for his son. As the court date approached, Emily steeled herself for another battle. She knew Aaron would fight the claim, but this time, there was no turning back. She had to secure the future for her child, even if it meant confronting Aaron one more time. The day of the hearing arrived, and Emily walked into the courtroom with a quiet sense of resolve. She sat in the front, her lawyer by her side, while Aaron appeared, his face betraying his annoyance and frustration. He hadn't expected Emily to pursue him legally for child support, thinking she might let it slide or handle things privately. But this time, Emily was determined to stand up for herself and her son. As the court proceedings began, Emily's lawyer presented the DNA test results, which confirmed Aaron's paternity, and argued that it was now his legal obligation to contribute to the child's upbringing. Aaron's lawyer, on the other hand, tried to deflect, claiming that Aaron had not willingly been involved in the pregnancy, had never agreed to raise the child, and that Emily was the one who had made the decision to bring the child into the world. Aaron, growing increasingly uncomfortable, interrupted his lawyer, his anger bubbling to the surface. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't sign up for any of it. I shouldn't be forced to pay for this kid." Emily's face hardened at his words, but she remained composed, her lawyer standing firm by her side. "Aaron Reed, you are the father," the judge said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "And as such, you are required by law to provide child support. The test results confirm this. This case is closed, and child support payments will begin immediately." Aaron's face turned crimson with rage, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, his voice dripping with resentment. "I'll make sure you regret this." But the judge paid no attention to his outburst. With a final ruling, she ordered Aaron to begin child support payments and to provide for the child's welfare moving forward. It was a small victory for Emily, but it wasn't without its emotional toll. Aaron's fury and his refusal to accept responsibility were palpable, but Emily knew that this legal victory meant she could start planning for her and her son's future with a bit more stability. As Aaron stormed out of the courtroom, Emily remained behind, her heart heavy but determined. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one she would have to navigate alone. But for the first time in a long while, she felt empowered to do so. 2 years passed. Emily managed to keep her life together with the support of her family. Her parents and siblings were there for her when things got overwhelming. Despite their help, Emily often felt empty inside. She had tried to start fresh, even considered dating again, but every attempt seemed to fall apart before it could begin. Men didn't stick around, and even Aaron had completely vanished from her life, just sending her money every month. Her days were lonely, and her nights were worse, filled with memories of her mistakes and overwhelming regret. She spent hours thinking about Edward, wondering how he was and how things might have been different if she hadn't made those choices. Guilt gnawed at her constantly, and the weight of her conscience felt unbearable. A few months later, Aaron's life had taken a drastic turn. After months of reckless behavior, he found himself in a hospital bed, barely conscious and in extreme pain. It all started when one of the husbands of the women he had infected with HIV found him. The man, furious and heartbroken, had tracked Aaron down. When Aaron returned home one evening, the confrontation happened. The husband didn't waste time. He attacked Aaron in a fit of rage, beating him to the edge of his life using a baseball bat. Then taking a knife out of his pocket, he chopped off Aaron's member and his family jewels. He took the chopped meat and fed it to a stray dog right in front of Aaron. The police found Aaron barely alive, and he was rushed to the hospital. Aaron suffered several broken bones, and now would never be able to walk properly. The husband's actions made sure that Aaron would never be able to think about sex, let alone have sex, something Aaron had never thought possible. Aaron's troubles didn't stop there. 3 women he had infected with HIV sued him, and their husbands joined in, demanding compensation for the harm Aaron caused. The women's marriages fell apart as their husbands could no longer accept them after learning about the disease. Divorce proceedings began, and everyone involved was left in pain and confusion. Emily heard about all of this from the news. She had been waiting for Aaron to send her child support money, but he had failed to do so. She contacted him, and he finally told him about his issues. She sat in silence, processing the story. Karma has strange ways of working, she said quietly to herself. Aaron had caused so much pain, and now it seemed like he was finally paying for it. Aaron's actions had ruined so many lives, including hers. He was now paying the price for his choices. Emily didn't feel happy about what had happened to him, but she couldn't help feeling that it was deserved. As she reflected on everything, she knew she couldn't change the past. But at least she could now focus on her son and start rebuilding her life. Aaron had lost everything: his health, his reputation, and any chance at a future. Meanwhile, Edward had begun a new life, far away from the shadows of his past. Seeking peace, he turned to nature, solo camping, mountain climbing, and capturing his adventures on video. He started a blog, sharing his journeys with an online community. His new hobby brought him calm and fulfillment, and his videos quickly gained a following, providing a steady income. He even got a dog, a loyal companion who accompanied him everywhere, a friend he knew would never betray him. One evening, while rereading comments under one of his recent videos, Edward paused as a comment from a woman caught his eye. Her words made him stop. "I recognized you. I apologize for everything that happened. I was wrong. Please forgive me. I'm sorry for reaching out this way, but I have no other way to contact you. Just know that I deeply regret it." Edward didn't need a name to know who had written it. Emily must have found his blog, either by chance or while searching for him. Her words stirred a strange blend of nostalgia and relief within him. While the pain she had caused still lingered, he no longer felt anger. He had found peace in his new life. After a brief pause, Edward responded to her comment. "I do not hold a grudge. God will judge us. Live happily." He clicked send, then closed his laptop, feeling a sense of closure. He had made peace with his past, and now he was free from bitterness, looking ahead with only hope for the future. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.